Thank you very much for having me. I'm extremely happy to be here. First of all, as you mentioned, I'm by elimination. I'm the one who's an alumni. It's the first time I come to the campus here, so I'm it's extremely happy with that. Second is also quite happy to talk about this topic because this is something that we've been looking a lot at over the past few years within McKinsey, and this is also something that I'm quite interested in. I lead a lot of our economic development work, which is working for governments actually to help them basically to grow their economies, right? Just one notice: I won't be as eloquent as Her Excellency, and I won't be as grounded in the continent as ZOUAOUI, but I'll try to bring a little bit of a contribution to the discussion. So maybe a few themes. First of all, we've talked about it. We've talked about the la mondialisation heureuse, happy globalization, which was the era in which I grew up, the 80s, the 90s, let's say the 90s, the years 2000, these 35, 40 years, where the concerns for CEOs were mostly, and boards were mostly growth, inflation, optimization of supply chains, opening new markets and geographies, and with the guarantee, with basically the stability of the world granted, shared rules of exchange of trade among countries granted. You mentioned the World Bank and IMF playing basically the big role of trying to uniformize the world. That has been extremely productive. It rose a lot of the global population out of poverty. Let's not forget that. But we're in a very different world right now. We're transitioning in a world where many transitions are happening at the same time. I won't repeat what Her Excellency said: technological with AI, environmental, demographic, and world order change. The page you have up here is interesting because it's showing the number of disruptions, major disruptions to businesses that we can witness over, the past 25 years. And what can we see? We can see that we had 4 or 5 of these disruptions every 5 years, and I think you mentioned an average of a big one every 3.7 years. 4 or 5, over a period of 5 years, until 2015. Over the past 5-7 years, it's become 15 to 20, and we are currently living in one, probably 2, and they're really impacting businesses in a completely unprecedented way. What's also interesting is that these disruptions, you will see, some are driven by nature, hurricanes, floods. Some are driven by nature, also in a way, COVID. But more and more, some are also driven by business cycles. The crisis of 2008, our business cycles bring naturally disruptions. But more and more than half of the disruptions you see are geopolitical. They are driven by relationship between countries. So more specifically, how can geopolitics impact? They impact businesses through specific levers. We categorize them between let's say the trade and economics one, and then the more economic security ones. Let me share some of these and how they actually impact businesses. Trade agreements. We were under the WTO for a number of years. WTO was great, multilateral. We all spoke basically the same language and operated under the same laws and rules. Over the past 10 years, we've seen an increase of almost plus 35 or 40% additional bilateral ones. So we're moving basically from let's all agree to rules into, okay, you and I are going to make a deal. And we see that European Union with Mercosur, European Union just recently with Australia, and an example. The GCC had basically a trade agreement, and the 6 countries would trade among them. But over the past 4 or 5 years, one of them decided to negotiate alone, and basically started doing many bilateral agreements. So this is basically rupturing and breaking the multilateral alliances to basically one-on-one G2G, government-to-government bilateral relationships. Tariffs, of course, we've all lived April and of this year, last year, and the subsequent month. I won't spend too much time on that. Import-export controls are things that we don't necessarily see a lot. But there's been a hike of 20 folds. Basically, we've reached now globally more than 5,000 controls on export of imports on many different products. Again, products flowed completely easily undisrupted now. There are sanctions and exceptions for more than 5,000 globally. Just to give examples, in Africa, in Namibia, Zimbabwe, a couple of years ago, said, we're going to stop in-processed lithium to be exported. That's just an example, not very far from us. Industrial policies are also a big one. They can be helpful when they're going to create industries and help incentivize. We counted, a team that I was leading counted more than $2 trillion incentives that were out there trying to find investors, which is a complete change versus what we had just 10, 20 years ago in the age of the Washington Consensus, where that was haram to actually give incentives. And these are all fighting for different things. In particular, I wanted you to produce in my country. The IRA from Biden administration a few years ago was saying, I'm going to give hundreds of billions, $650 billion in automotive and other sectors. But you know what? 100% of the components have to be coming from the US and none from China. These are just examples of the concrete levers from that we see geopolitics infiltrate and shape basically businesses and what CEOs do. I won't talk too much about the right ones. You've lived some of them. Cybersecurity in Morocco, we've lived a big issue last year, the previous one. Conflicts, we are right now in one. I think there's recorded 61 active state-based conflicts in 2024. I think is the highest, if my notes are correct, since 1946. Just to give you a little bit of an idea of where we live today. And these have, just right now, the close of Strait of Hormuz, for just a period, for a mild closure, and this is not the extreme case. We're estimating OECD at least a 0.3 up to 1.5% global GDP loss. So the global GDP could be from 3% down to 1.5, halved basically in some cases if this is continuing with I think oil at sustained $120, etc. So that's the world in which we live. Implications for CEOs and companies are real. These are creating risks. These risks could be, sudden collapse of demand, tariffs. At some point, you don't know if you can, you don't have any more demand in specific countries. Production, supply chain disruptions. You may remember the automotive sector 4 years ago did not have chips anymore. It cost $200 billion of revenue to global automotive, just because there was a constraint in chips because of the of COVID and plants basically closed, etc. I was on a call earlier today, just on my way to here with our geopolitics group and with McKinsey, and some examples that were talked about. Right now, we don't see them yet, but because of the closure of Hormuz again, we won't produce as much plastics as we used to on a daily basis, and plastics is everywhere. So it will impact car production, it will impact data centers. There are just things that we just need what is being produced out there. And these are the real consequences that we live in. But there are also opportunities. There could be sudden gains of competitiveness on specific markets when tariffs were out there from US tariffs were imposed different ways by countries. We've seen sudden advantages of a country saying, oh, now I'm more competitive versus another one. This could be temporary. Other are more durable. We've seen reorientation of supply chains and production. Mexico, Vietnam. Mexico is increased its non-oil exports to the US by 18%, Vietnam by 42%, just in a year, right? And these are real tangible opportunities that we can also think about in Africa, in Morocco, in terms of opportunities for us. I'll try to go a little bit faster. Where do we stand? Where does Africa stand in global flows? So global flows are continuing. If you look at trade, global trade, there's been an increase in 5% in 2 years. The global trade only grew by 2% during that period. So Africa is accelerating. Of course, yes, these are still not industrial goods. These are still mostly commodities. Aid, there was a big discussion on aid. Indeed, it has dropped a lot. This is not just the US. Most OECD countries have actually reduced, and not only to Africa, but aid everywhere in the world has gone down, minus 9% in these 3 years. But the interesting surprise is that also gave space for investments. And if you look at foreign direct investments in just the 2-year period of 22 to 24, it almost doubled. Of course, there's there a exceptional UAE investment in Egypt by up to 35 billion. Ras al-Hikmah. Okay, you can remove that. It's still an increase by 20% over that period. So this is a trend that you see. And these investments are, yes, still in minerals, but also in renewable energy. So these are interesting things, and submarine cables, so infrastructure that I can actually carry and lift the continent's development. But we do need to see much more FDI to be able to really aid the continent. Now let's look at, if you go to the previous page, let's look at the mix. We did establish Africa is increasingly connected to the global flows. How is the mix? The theme here is geopolitics, China, US. Where are we? Where does Africa stand? Interestingly, it's quite balanced. The picture is quite balanced. This is trade only. Of course, the FDIs could differ. The picture is quite balanced and is rebalancing even further. Europe is moving from 29% to 25% in 4 or 5 years. The US is taking a little bit more, China a little bit more. We used to have ideas that China was actually dominating African trade. It is not necessarily the case. It is a balanced picture. We do in McKinsey, we developed an interesting metric. For diplomats, it could ring a bit of a bell. It's called the geopolitical distance. The geopolitical distance is calculated simply by looking at the track record of UN votes on all matters of the Security Council for the past 20 years, country by country. And we just saw how much countries are aligned in their votes among them. That created an index. So we apply that index to countries, and then we look at how trade is changing depending on the geopolitical alignment of the different countries. And what's interesting is that in Africa, over the past 5 years, the geopolitical distance only reduced by 3%. It's almost just calculation. It's a mixed question. While Europe decreased by 7% and the US by 9%, meaning the Western world is completely reorienting their flows to their friends, the allies, while Africa is in a way multi-aligned. I think it has been mentioned earlier. And someone said, I forgot earlier in the discussion, Deputy Ambassador, I think, you were saying, on n'a pas besoin de choisir son camp. And I think Africa has not chosen. Of course, Africa is not one entity. And so behind this is some countries are completely aligned on the right, others are completely aligned on the left. It would take another conference to just go into that type of detail. But indeed, it is a bit of there is a potential of diversity of relationships, as you mentioned, Your Excellency, for Morocco. Now, this geopolitical position does not mean there is less risk for Africa. When asked, CEOs consider geopolitical risk as their top concern. Cited in a recent survey, more than 67% consider that this is one of the top 3 issues that they have on a daily basis, right? And we know they have other problems, as you were saying. So geopolitical really ranks very, very high. And rightfully so. On the right side, you have here a research that the IMF published in 24 about basically modeling geopolitical scenarios and saying what if we were in a completely fragmented world where China on the right side and the US on the other side, what would happen to the world's economy? And you would see there would be over 10 years, 2 points of impact for the world negatively, meaning we would grow 2% of the economy less than what we would have on a base case. But for Africa, that's minus 4%. So it's double the impact of a fragmented world. And your oil exporters, I think someone was saying, would be a bit more shielded. Non-oil exporters would be even more than 4%. And the reason for that is multiple. they're relying more on trade. As you were saying, we import everything, and any dollar that comes in is an export of something. Food, fertilizer, basic imports. For revenues, even budgets, custom is almost 100% of the budget in many African countries. So that is important. Weak intra-regional trade. You talked about weak local production, but also countries don't trade among them, even if they are complementary. And so that is fragility, because we'd rather export and import from goods that are from someone 5,000-10,000 kilometers rather than just cross the border and have something from a neighboring country. And that is creating fragility and less resilience in Africa. So reliance on global trade is one of the factors that explain this, but then also capacity to absorb shock. You mentioned depth, for sure. Fiscal space is extremely low. Financing sources and capacity to get capital is also weak. And then we also forget the complexity of the world also requires additional compliance burden and risks and just insurances, and these are just costs that are weigh much more on Africa than they weigh on other parts of the world. So just let me close with maybe what can CEOs do? What is the playbook? I think that was the title of this keynote that you suggested. McKinsey developed a framework around basically 4 or 5 things that can be done by CEOs. In short, it's CEOs need to build a geopolitical muscle, which is a set of capabilities to navigate this new world. I noted, Your Excellency, that I liked a lot the point on Bani, brutal, anxious, non-linear, incomprehensible. I think that doesn't replace VUCA. It just adds on to VUCA because it's still volatile and uncertain, etc. And so that requires capabilities. And this is the new world we will be living in the next 30, 40 years, right? And so it is not, CEOs cannot wait and say, oh, this will calm down and we'll be back to normal. This is normal. And so this requires a new set of capabilities. How do we operate now in this world, right? First of all, building internal geopolitical foresight. What does foresight mean? Foresight is not forecast. It is not just insight. It is the capacity to actually translate external events that you can foresee, that you can anticipate, translating them into business implications. How do I change my strategy? How do I change my footprint in terms of demand, in terms of supply? How do I change my sourcing? How do I think about differentiated pricing? How do I allocate my capital? So these are business decisions of every day. They need to be translated from, here's what I see, here's what the plan A, plan B, here's what could happen, bringing that into actual business decisions. And of course, this requires insights. It requires being plugged in the world, understanding, understanding what's happening in terrorist trade policy, etc. And concretely, this is about scenario planning, what changes under World A, under World B, and it requires also external expertise of different types. As I was saying earlier, McKinsey was never in geopolitics. It was almost a taboo word for us. It has been basically business, globalization. We created now 2 years ago, a geopolitics practice. We publish on that. We hire people who are ex-military, who are ex-diplomats, who actually understand this stuff that the boardroom and the management never even thought about. There's really an interrelationship and a mix between businesses and geopolitics, between the government world and the business world and the financiers world that we've never seen before. And that's what is needed to be able to live this new and survive and navigate this new world. Engage constructively on the external agenda, the country agenda. Let's not forget, this is the government world. This is G2G relationship. That's geopolitics. And it cannot be separate, as I was just mentioning. So CEO needs to get ahead. They need to get closer to governments. What does it mean? Engage early with policymakers, regulators. Join industry bodies, industry coalitions. Engage with governments on topics that are, what are our strategic reserves, all right? What is the regional integration agenda? And push that. What is how do we communicate in case of national crisis to the consumers, etc. Right? So these are, there just needs to be much more links between governments and businesses, and it is the companies, the CEOs who know concretely the bottom line impact. They make the money, they pay the salaries, they know what's at stake. They also need to go and just mention that, influence, get the governments to understand. Building organizational operational resilience. This is about having the right sort of deployment in terms of sourcing. Are we relying on only one route, one port, or two or three? What's our energy exposure? If you're a company only has reliance on gas, right now you don't produce anymore, right? So just thinking about the diversity and anti-fragility of your operating model and your operations is extremely important. I'll go quickly. Prepare for regulatory change, strengthen compliance readiness. These are important things. There are sanctions. If you are producing something with some components, you can't go anymore in the US, and maybe that wasn't the case 3 months ago. It is the case now. How do you anticipate that? How do you think? You will get sanctions. It is a cost, but it's a new cost of doing business that needs to be integrated in the way companies operate, the way companies price. And finally, maybe just a little bit of silver lining. We've been all gloomy and talking about risks. For sure, we live that. We open TV and use every day. But there are also opportunities. I think there are opportunities at different levels. Manufacturing relocations. I talked about Vietnam, about Mexico. Why not Africa? Why not North Africa as being a little bit also of that nearshoring and reindustrialization in nearshore territories to Europe? It is also, the concern on sovereignty, strategic security, be it food or be it other aspects, should also push governments to invest in local production and local capabilities, and that is what's needed. So, a little bit being constrained to do that is not a bad thing. There are opportunities to create new energy corridors. There's a lot of sun over here. Europe needs gas. The investments in new energy corridors could be opportunities. So, just as a close, I think this is a new era. It's here to stay. Whatever you've read in history, in your when I was sitting here, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, what I read at that time won't apply. It's history now. So we need to embrace this new world. The new playbook is very important. CEOs cannot wait. Past stable environment will not come back. But again, Africa has things to offer and can capture opportunities from that. It is just, for company CEOs and you guys to act and not proactively, right?
Thank you so much. Yes, sure.